Still just a snail. Huh. Sticking with a cripple for 3 years. Bro. You wouldn't get it. Maybe they've got some special preferences. That cripple in bed. Heh. If you ask me, it's all just Madison's scheme. Using one leg to tie someone down for life. Laughter echoed from the private room. I stood outside, my fists clenched tightly, until the laughter faded. Then came Ethan's low voice. All right. That's enough. Someone feigned surprise. No way. Don't tell me you're actually in love with that cripple. A brief silence followed. Then I heard him say, how could I? I mean, I don't have any weird preferences. Honestly, living with a cripple every day is exhausting. If it weren't for what happened 3 years ago. Hey, Madison, what are you doing here? The door to the private room swung open, and every gaze landed on me. Their eyes were filled with pity, disdain, everything but surprise. For a fleeting moment, Ethan looked startled and uneasy, but he quickly masked it. He strode over to me, his tone full of reproach. Don't you know your situation? What are you doing here? Sitting in my wheelchair. I locked eyes with him silently and raised my phone. You asked me to come. An hour earlier, Ethan had texted me, saying he was drunk and needed me to pick him up. Ethan pushed me into the private room and let out a sigh, closing his eyes. Are you happy now? One of the men who had mocked me earlier raised his hand with a grin. Sorry about that, Madison. We were just joking around. Wanted to see how much you care about Ethan. He claimed the text had been sent as a prank, using Ethan's phone, to prove how much I loved him. Their disdain was barely concealed in their voices. I turned to Ethan, confused. He seemed to have known all along. I didn't think you'd actually come, he said, noticing my expression. He pinched the bridge of his nose with a look of exasperation. Think about it. Even if I were drunk, any friend or driver could have taken me home. What could you have done? I followed his gaze down to my legs. What could I do? Probably just panic after getting the text. Rush out in my wheelchair to hail a cab, and trouble the driver to lift me in. Thinking about it now, I realized how foolish I'd been. So eager to play the joke in their eyes. Well, if nothing's wrong, I'll head back now. Lowering my head, I turned my wheelchair around and started to leave. Someone stuck their foot out to block my way. Don't leave so soon. Madison, you can't show up and not have a drink. A glass of alcohol was shoved in front of me. I'm allergic to alcohol, I said, glancing at Ethan again. He stayed silent, facing a room full of mocking stares. I quietly took the glass. Haha, now that's the Madison we know. The man didn't finish his sentence. He yelped as I splashed the drink in his face. What the hell? You cripple, he shouted, switching my wheelchair to electric mode. I rolled over the foot that had blocked my way without hesitation. The room behind me exploded with curses. I ignored them all, carefully shutting the door to their private room behind me. Ethan chased after me, immediately launching into scolding. Madison, don't go too far. They're my friends. He reached out to grab me, but I blocked him. They're your friends? And I'm your wife. You defend your friends. But when your wife is humiliated, you just stand there. Ethan pressed his lips together, a clear sign that he knew he was wrong but refused to admit it. Suddenly, I felt like everything was meaningless. I turned my wheelchair toward the main door, moving forward steadily. Just as I reached the door, Ethan caught up with me again. They're a bit blunt, sure, but what they said, it's all true. Ethan's words stung like needles. I rubbed my damp eyes hard, trying to keep my voice steady. Let's get a divorce. He froze in place, the words of refusal spilling from his mouth without hesitation. No, I can't divorce you. I looked at him in confusion. Why not? I heard it with my own ears. You don't like me. Before, I could lie to myself. Even if his friends didn't welcome me, I believed he loved me. That was enough. But tonight, after hearing those words, I realized how ridiculous I'd been. The night wind was cold. Ethan took off his jacket and draped it over my legs. It's my fault. What I said earlier. I was drunk. Don't believe it. In any case, we're not divorcing. Be good. His familiar minty scent surrounded me, and I couldn't hold back my tears anymore. Ethan pushed my wheelchair as we moved through the crowded streets. I'll take you home, he said softly. He walked slowly, lost in thought, so much so that he didn't notice a pothole ahead. I quietly reminded him. After murmuring an apology, he fell silent again. I hesitated before speaking. I just want you to know, if you think it's a burden, if you don't love me, we can get a divorce. I'd loved Ethan for 10 years, but that didn't mean I would cling to him forever. His voice sounded annoyed. I said we're not divorcing. Madison. I closed my eyes and stopped talking. Memories of the past came rushing back. 3 years ago, when the ceiling of the lab collapsed, my instincts kicked in. I pushed Ethan out of the way and saved him, but I was hit instead and lost consciousness. That day, I had planned to confess to him, to finally give an answer to my 7 years of silent admiration. When I woke up, the first thing I saw was Ethan's reddened eyes. Madison, are you insane? Do you not care about your own life? Who asked you to meddle? I opened my mouth, but my throat was too dry and hoarse to speak. I wanted to tell him it was okay, that I liked him, and that I wanted to repay the kindness his family had shown me. After all, my parents had passed away when I was very young. Without the support of the Carter family, my life would have been much harder. When I tried to get out of bed to get myself some water, I realized my legs were completely numb. Ethan's guilt deepened when he noticed. He took my hand and said, "From now on, I'll be your legs. Madison, let's get married." I admit, that moment, I was overwhelmed by happiness. Okay, Ethan, actually, I've liked you for 7 years. Ethan gripped my hand tightly but didn't say a word. I subconsciously ignored the trace of reluctance in his eyes. The next morning, when I woke up, Ethan was already gone. On the bedside table, he had left a glass of warm milk. "Work has been busy lately. Don't wait for me for dinner at night." His note read. I took a sip of the milk. It was sweet, but I'd never liked sweet milk. Outside the door, there was a clattering sound followed by a loud shout. "Good morning, sister-in-law." It was Ethan's cousin, Rain Carter. I let out a long sigh, thinking to myself, what a headache. Rain leaned against my wheelchair with a familiar yet mocking smile. "Sister-in-law, you're something else. Always giving my brother trouble. Last night's dinner wasn't just some random gathering. There were several important connections Ethan needed to build. But your little outburst ruined everything for him. So, what do you plan to do about it?" I looked at her calmly. "You can have Ethan divorce me." The excitement I'd felt about our marriage had long since faded. Over time, I began to notice Ethan's indifference, his subtle distance. His friends hadn't been hostile toward me from the start either. Deep down, I understood. They were simply voicing what Ethan couldn't say himself. I had told him many times, if it's just about saving your life, there's no need. We can divorce. But he had always refused. Rain sneered. "You don't actually think my brother won't divorce you because he likes you, do you?" She grabbed my wheelchair and pushed me forward forcefully. I tried to resist, but it was futile. What could someone like me, bound to a wheelchair, possibly do? Leaning close to my ear, she laughed softly. "Come on, I'll show you something entertaining." Rain's entertainment turned out to be Ethan on a date with another woman. Through the glass window of a couple's restaurant, I saw Ethan gently brushing aside strands of the woman's hair. The tenderness in her eyes was almost overflowing. Rain pointed at them with her chin. "See that? That's the person my brother actually likes." I couldn't understand. Then why doesn't he just divorce me? I'm not the one clinging to him. Rain scoffed. Frustrated. "Isn't it because you shamelessly used the whole saving his life thing to trap him? If he divorces you, what will people think of him? An ungrateful bastard? Stop pretending to be so generous. This is exactly what you planned all along." I didn't understand why everyone thought I had schemed against Ethan. I lost my legs, but he lost his freedom. The people inside were so engrossed in their conversation that they didn't notice me just outside the window. I smiled, wheeling myself closer and lightly tapping on the glass. Rain hadn't expected me to do that and froze. "What are you doing?" she hissed. It was laughable. She'd brought me here to see this but expected me to silently stew in misery afterward. She had no time to stop me. The two inside turned and saw us. Panic flashed across their faces. Ethan was in front of me within moments. "Madison, Let me explain. He began. But he didn't seem to know what to say. His eyes darted toward Rain in frustration. Who told you to bring her here? Rain pouted, looking indignant. I was just trying to help your poor wife. You two are the ones who've been in love for years. I froze in place. In love for years? Before confessing to Ethan back then, I had cautiously asked if he had a girlfriend. His answer had been no. If he had, I wouldn't have found the courage to say anything. Madison, go home, Ethan said, scolding Rain before hurriedly calling a cab for me. Wait. I raised my hand to stop him. I'd like to have a chat with the young lady inside. Madison. Ethan frowned, his displeasure evident. I gently pulled his hand and smiled. You'd better let me. Otherwise, I won't hesitate to shout homewrecker. Right here on the street. I am a disabled person. Over the years, I've grown used to the same kinds of looks. They no longer bother me. The only ones who should feel ashamed are people like you. Ethan's frown deepened, but it was clear he cared about the woman inside. The next second, he pushed my wheelchair into the restaurant. Ethan, is this your wife? The woman inside seemed to know about me already. She rested her head on one hand, smiling at me. Hi, I'm Sienna Lynn, Ethan's first love. She was just like the others, pretending to be kind, yet brimming with malice. Ethan, why don't you and your cousin take a seat nearby? I'd like to have a word with Miss Madison, she said with an air of authority. With just a few words, she had taken control of the situation. Ethan hesitated, but eventually, he led Rain to a table not far from us, his worried eyes fixed on me. Sienna casually stirred her coffee, her tone light and conversational. Miss Madison, you know, if it weren't for you, I would have been the one to marry Ethan. I didn't know. I replied honestly. I've never seen you in his circle. I didn't even know he had a first love. She raised her head, her gaze tinged with resentment. We were in a secret relationship. My family always believed his family wouldn't approve. Only Ethan's mother silently supported us. We dated in secret for 2 years. Before the accident, we were already preparing to tell our families. But you ruined it. So that's why Rain hated me so much when she found out I was marrying Ethan. But how could it be my fault? I had asked him more than once if he had a girlfriend, and he chose to hide the truth. After the earthquake, he made the decision to marry me himself. Sienna seemed to read my thoughts and let out a soft laugh. Are you curious why he insisted on marrying you? I looked up at her, a sinking feeling in my gut. Something told me I wouldn't like the answer. Because he found your diary. Her words hit me like a bolt of lightning. Your diary, where you confessed your crush on him for years. He didn't find it sooner. Didn't find it later. No. He found it right after you lost your legs and fell unconscious. And not just him. His mother saw it too. My mind went blank. So, he had seen my diary. Sienna continued, her voice dripping with bitterness. Ethan was originally going to pretend he hadn't seen it, but his mother got to it first. The elders meant well. They've watched you grow up. And the Carter and Madison families have been friends for years. So, that day, Ethan's mother asked him, do you love Madison? Ethan thought, if both sides had feelings for each other, why not? But he misunderstood their concern as pressure. And under what he believed to be that pressure, he gave me up and married you. I felt like a fool, remembering how I had bared my heart to him in excitement after learning he wanted to marry me. It had been nothing more than a joke. He could divorce me now, I said quietly. But he hasn't. That's what I don't understand. Sienna's lips curved into a mocking smile. Because you're useful to him. Ethan is at a critical stage in his career. If people found out he abandoned the woman who saved his life, what do you think they'd say about him? Miss Madison, you've already made things difficult for him once. Don't make it harder for him a second time. Okay, someone as cunning as you. It wouldn't surprise me if losing your parents was karma. I couldn't hold back anymore. I grabbed the tray holding her coffee and threw it in her face. She could say anything, but bringing up my late parents was crossing the line. Madison, what are you doing? Ethan shouted, quickly stepping in front of Sienna to shield her. I pointed at her. She insulted my parents. Sienna looked disheveled and panicked, her eyes brimming with tears. I didn't. I was just explaining our past to him. Ethan glared at me. his face filled with anger. Apologize. I stared at both of them for a long moment before I laughed. All right, I'll apologize. But before that, can I say something to you? Ethan didn't respond, which I took as consent. Come closer. This is something only for you to hear. He leaned down slightly. I mustered all the strength I had and slapped him hard across the face. Divorce me, I said. Ethan's expression darkened completely. Madison, I've told you, we can't get divorced. Can't get divorced? I sneered. What you really care about is your reputation, isn't it? But this time, I won't let you use me to save face while I continue to suffer. I turned my wheelchair to leave, but suddenly, I was yanked out of it with great force and thrown to the ground. Ethan's eyes were bloodshot as he yelled, Divorce? Look at you. Who would want you? A cripple. After leaving me, I stared at him in disbelief, unable to comprehend that these words had come from him. Do you think I was born this way? I shouted back. Ethan, I lost my legs because I saved you. I'm your benefactor. And I never begged to save you. Did I? Did anyone ask me if I was willing? I would have rather been the one who ended up disabled. Do you have any idea how much guilt has weighed on me because of this? Do you know how much I've sacrificed because of that guilt? He vented all his frustrations about owing me his life, as if I had demanded it from him. I wish you'd never saved me, he finished. I sat there in stunned silence, staring at him. Then, amidst the overwhelming humiliation, I felt a faint wetness. My body had betrayed me. I'd lost control and wet myself. Ethan noticed immediately. Without a word, he picked me up and put me back in the wheelchair. His eyes were filled with disgust as he draped his coat over me. Look at yourself. What can you even do without me? His voice was cold. I'll take you home. Calm down and think things through. He called a car for me. The driver, a chubby middle-aged woman, arrived quickly. Ethan had already spoken to her, slipping her some extra cash to ensure she would help push my wheelchair to the door when we arrived. As the driver helped me into the car, she noticed my mood and gave me an encouraging thumbs up. Don't lose hope, sweetheart. Life still has its bright sides. She probably thought I was on the verge of giving up completely. Maybe she worried I'd do something drastic. But I wouldn't, because half an hour earlier, I had received a text from an unknown number. It contained a screenshot of a chat. So, Ethan, your wife's really dead set on divorcing you. Huh. Looks like the devoted husband act you've been using with Mr. Gu won't work anymore. But that's fine. If one path doesn't work, we can always try another. Remember Mr. Chi I mentioned before? He loves playing around with disabled women. Madison would be perfect for him. Since you're divorcing her anyway, this is the perfect chance to catch him in the act and accuse him of cheating. That way, you won't have to bear the shame of abandoning your savior. Tomorrow night at 9. Don't say I didn't give you a chance. There were more messages, but it was Ethan's single reply. Okay. That shattered me completely. How ruthless. He resented me for saving his life, blamed me for the pressure it brought, and now he was planning to squeeze out the last bit of value I had left to pave his way forward. I didn't know who sent me that text message, but whoever it was, I had to thank them. Madison, I'm back. Ethan slurred as he stumbled into the house, reeking of alcohol. He wobbled over to me, crouching in front of my wheelchair. I'm sorry. I was such a jerk earlier. Let's not get a divorce. Okay. I looked at him calmly and gave him a soft smile. All right. Really? He asked, his tone filled with disbelief. I nodded and handed him a cup of hot milk. I was wrong about earlier too. Drink this to sober up. I've booked tickets to Madeira for tomorrow. Let's go on a trip together. Okay. Ethan looked startled at first, then confused. Tomorrow? Let's talk about it tomorrow. All right. I replied with a smile, pushing the milk closer to him. I watched as he drank it. The drug worked quickly. As expected, Ethan collapsed onto the floor, unconscious. Turns out losing mobility in your legs really is inconvenient. I spent 2 whole hours severing Ethan's legs. He woke up midway, screaming hysterically. I had no choice but to shove a towel into his mouth to muffle the noise. He shook his head violently as I worked. I patted his shoulder to calm him down. Don't worry. I won't kill you. I just want your legs. You don't care about them anyway. So why not return them to me? He whimpered, as though pleading. I slapped the chat log onto his face, and he finally went quiet, left only with pain and despair. Ethan fainted and regained consciousness several times throughout the process. When I was done, I removed the towel from his mouth, but he could barely speak. His faint gasps for breath were enough to make me put the towel back. I had no interest in hearing anything he had to say. I had woken up far too late in life. The moment I lost my legs, my life was ruined. If he wanted to destroy me entirely, then I'd simply beat him to it and destroy him first. I lit the charcoal in the room and lay down, waiting for sleep to take me. Felt good, knowing I'd take a monster with me when I left this world. I didn't expect to open my eyes again. The numbness in my legs made me widen them in disbelief. Then I realized I had gone back in time. I had been reborn. Before the accident, I shot up in shock, startling everyone else in the lab. Madison, are you okay? Someone asked, their voice filled with concern. I stared at my legs and mumbled something vague in response. I was back in my sophomore year. Back then, to be closer to Ethan, I'd chosen the same major as him and even managed to get into his project group. But that accident had forced me to abandon my studies entirely. Feeling the strength in my legs now, I trembled with excitement. There were still 10 minutes before the ceiling would start to collapse. Last time, I had risked everything to push Ethan aside, only to be crushed by the falling debris myself. Madison, are you okay? A large hand touched my forehead. It was Ethan. Do you have a fever? Do you want me to ask for a leave on your behalf? I instinctively avoided his hand, and a flicker of hurt appeared in his eyes. Our odd interaction caught the attention of others in the lab. Are you two fighting again? Someone teased. In the past, I had always been the one chasing after Ethan, while he neither accepted nor rejected me, which led everyone to jokingly call us a couple. He has a girlfriend. I have nothing to do with him. I quickly denied, feeling repulsed at the mere thought of being tied to Ethan in this lifetime. Seeing my swift rejection, coupled with my mention of his secret girlfriend, Ethan froze slightly, lowering his voice. He asked, Madison, is there some kind of misunderstanding between us? I looked at him and suddenly realized the crux of the strange dynamic between us. At this moment, Ethan already had a girlfriend, yet he still acted ambiguously toward me. Even after I pointed it out, he refused to admit it. He wanted the thrill of a forbidden relationship, but didn't want to give up the benefits of my affection. So this was who I'd once liked. A selfish and deceitful man from the start. A sudden exclamation snapped me out of my thoughts. The ceiling began to collapse, just as it had in my previous life. Ethan stood directly beneath the falling debris, while I was only near the edge of the danger zone. In my past life, I had pushed him out of harm's way without regard for my own safety. In this life, I ran out of the danger zone without hesitation. Madison, Ethan shouted in disbelief. The next second, the ceiling came crashing down. Ethan let out a cry before falling unconscious. Out of basic decency, I still called 911 for him. The doctor later informed me that Ethan's legs were paralyzed, and he would spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair. I had to fight hard not to laugh out loud. Madison, why? Ethan rasped, his voice hoarse and tinged with tears as he woke up. He sounded as if I had betrayed him. You could have saved me, he said, his voice trembling, as though I were some heartless villain. I tilted my head and looked at him. Ethan, stop pretending. I know you've come back too. Before we were married, Ethan had never called me Madison. Yet he just used that nickname, and his question, why didn't I save him, confirmed my suspicions. Ethan's face turned crimson as his secret was exposed. He had hoped to seize the moral high ground and guilt me, but I wasn't falling for it. I moved closer to him, gently patting his paralyzed legs. Ethan, your legs are gone. Do you remember what you said to me in our previous life? That it was you who begged me to save you. Did anyone ask if I was willing? You said you'd rather lose your own legs. I smiled at him. Well, congratulations. You've gotten your wish. Now you don't have to feel guilty about me anymore. You've only lost your legs. But at least now you're free of any unnecessary obligations. Ethan sat there stunned, his expression cycling through a kaleidoscope of emotions. Madison, Why didn't I realize earlier that you're insane? He spat, trying to salvage his pride. Can't you tell the difference between something said in anger and what's real? His words mirrored what he'd said in the previous life, how he didn't need saving. Back then, he'd blamed me for saving him. Now, he blamed me for not saving him. My anger boiled over, and I slapped him hard across the face. You know I'm crazy, yet you still dare to talk back to me? Do you want me to take another leg while I'm at it? Hearing this, Ethan flinched violently. The series of events must have reminded him of how he'd met his tragic end in our past life. I must have been out of my mind, he muttered. I've always hated women like you, at least in this life. I don't have to be forcibly tied to you. He was grasping at straws, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity. 10 minutes later, Mrs. Carter arrived in a panic. Mr. Carter was out of town on business and couldn't return, leaving her to bear this devastating news alone. Auntie, don't be too upset, I said with a gentle smile. At least he's still alive, and living is what matters most. I offered Aunt Carter a token of comfort. In my past life, she hadn't been particularly bad to me, but she wasn't especially good either. Before I married Ethan, she genuinely treated me like a daughter. After the wedding, she did feel sorry for me at times, but that pity couldn't withstand the passage of time or the weight of her son's repeated sighs. So, when Ethan's cousin humiliated me, she chose to turn a blind eye. Madison, watch your tone, Ethan said, clearly anxious. He didn't want his mother to worry, but in his current state, he couldn't even turn over by himself. Madison, my husband and I are busy. Thank you for taking care of Ethan. Aunt Carter sobbed as she held my hand. I know you've always cared about him. With things as they are now, her words trailed off into tears. I understood her meaning. She was worried that Ethan would be unwanted, just like she worried about me back then. I replied without hesitation. Auntie, I've always seen Ethan as an older brother. Besides, Ethan already has a girlfriend. Aunt Carter turned to Ethan, stunned. Is that true? Ethan. Ethan pressed his lips together tightly, clearly not wanting to reveal the truth so soon. But my statement had forced his hand. I helpfully added, I've already notified her. She's on her way. I don't want to come between anyone's relationship, and I hope you'll understand. Just as I finished speaking, Sienna Lynn, dressed in white, peered at the door. Her reaction mirrored Aunt Carter's. Shock, followed by tears. Aunt Carter had met Sienna before and hadn't liked her. Sienna's family situation, 2 older sisters and a younger brother, made her unsuitable in Aunt Carter's eyes as a match for Ethan. However, given the current circumstances, Aunt Carter couldn't say much and excused herself to buy food. Sienna's tear-streaked face, coupled with her fragile demeanor, evoked pity, yet Ethan avoided her gaze entirely. Madison, you shouldn't have called her here, he said, his voice laced with frustration. In my condition, how could I? He stopped mid-sentence as a faint yellow stain spread across the bedsheet. Sienna instinctively stepped back, her expression betraying a flicker of disgust. Ethan noticed, and his self-esteem took another hit. Madison, he pleaded. His eyes filled with desperation as he looked at me. I remained unmoved. What? Don't tell me you're expecting me to handle this. Your girlfriend is here. Wouldn't it be more appropriate for her to help? Turning to Sienna, I said with a polite smile, Miss Lynn, I've heard a little about your love story. Such deep love must mean you're committed for life. If that's the case, you should start learning how to take care of someone with a disability. Under the pressure of my moral judgment, Sienna reluctantly helped Ethan up, struggling to support him. The bathroom door slammed shut behind them, but not before I caught a glimpse of the resentment in her eyes. I smiled. Back then, I had been the one to suffer misfortune. They had the luxury of basking in their tragic, unfulfilled love. But now, with their roles reversed, could they remain so steadfast under the pressures of life? After briefly explaining a few things to Aunt Carter, I left. Ethan had his mother, his girlfriend. He didn't need me around to complicate things further. I went about my life as usual, attending classes, enjoying the freedom to walk and run again. The long-lost sense of freedom was intoxicating. I heard that Ethan hadn't given up and was doing rehabilitation exercises every day. but it wasn't making any progress. Aunt Carter contacted me every now and then, subtly expressing her dissatisfaction with Sienna. It was clear she didn't believe Sienna could take care of Ethan the way I had. Ethan also tried to reach me, but I had blocked all his contact information. 3 months later, I went out to dinner with my lab teammates and unexpectedly ran into Ethan and Sienna. Sienna was pushing Ethan's wheelchair, and both of them looked displeased. She was busy berating Ethan and didn't notice me. "What are you doing here? Coming out in public like this?" she snapped. Her tone of disdain was a stark contrast to her previously gentle demeanor. I couldn't blame her for being upset. I had done some quiet digging and discovered that the so-called romantic love story between Ethan and Sienna was nothing but a calculated scheme on Sienna's part. Her dysfunctional family background had made her determined to find a wealthy man with little intelligence to help her change her fate. Ethan had appeared at just the right moment. Unfortunately for her, in the previous life, I had stolen him. As for this life, Ethan's face turned red from humiliation. "If I don't come, how will I know what you and your friends are saying about me?" Sienna sneered. "You're a cripple. A useless man. Did they say anything untrue? Look at yourself. You can't even go to the bathroom without my help. What else can you do? If it weren't for me wanting to escape my own family, do you think I'd ever choose to be with someone like you?" Ethan trembled all over. "You. What did you just say?" Sienna ignored his furious glare. If I had known taking care of a cripple was this troublesome, I would have picked a different target. "Divorce." Ethan roared. "Let's get divorced before we even have the wedding." So they were already legally married. It seemed Aunt Carter, realizing her son's situation, had decided not to let him be too picky anymore. Sienna punched Ethan twice without holding back. "Divorce? You think I don't want to? Taking care of you for 3 months has been unbearable. If it weren't for your insufferable mother, do you think I'd want to marry you?" The mask of the delicate, fragile flower was off, revealing Sienna's true, ferocious nature. But in a way, the two of them were a perfect match. I couldn't help but laugh, and only then did they notice me. Sienna, eager to rid herself of Ethan, immediately turned to me. "Perfect timing. Take your brother away." Back when Ethan and Sienna were secretly dating, he had told her that I was his younger sister. Sienna gave Ethan a cold glance. "I'm going back to my party. Don't cause me any more trouble." Without even looking back, she walked away, leaving Ethan and me staring at each other. What he was experiencing now was exactly what I had gone through in my past life. "Ethan, do you still remember what your friends used to say about me?" I asked, breaking the silence. He turned his head away, his body trembling slightly. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." I cut him off. "You knew everything. You just didn't care because it wasn't happening to you." I gave him a faint smile. "All right. Don't be upset. If you ask me, Sienna's treatment of you isn't that bad." "He just insulted you a little," Ethan said, his voice shaky. "At least I didn't send you to some old pervert with special preferences." "Right." I had meant to comfort him with a touch of sarcasm, but his face grew paler with every word I said. "No, Madison, let me explain. I never intended to really hurt you. I planned everything. There was incense in the room that would knock him out before he could touch you. The next day, I just pretend." He was rambling, trying to justify himself, until my cold, piercing gaze silenced him. Actually, that time, I think I had already started to love you," he stammered. I slapped him with all the strength I could muster. Once didn't feel like enough, so I hit him again and again. "Love?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger. "How dare you even mention love? You offered me to another man and called it love? You let your friends humiliate me and called it love? You wanted the best of both worlds. And that's your idea of love? No, Ethan, you didn't love me. You were just desperate after realizing you were crippled. Your so-called perfect Sienna no longer loved you, so you settled for someone who would devote themselves entirely to you. You're selfish, Ethan, and you don't deserve love." After that day, Ethan never came looking for me again. My life, on the other hand, grew more and more carefree. Occasionally, people would bring him up in conversation, telling me how miserable his life had become. I heard that in front of Aunt Carter. Sienna treated Ethan relatively well, but behind closed doors, She would beat and berate him constantly. Strangely enough, Ethan tolerated it all without complaint. I figured he must truly love Sienna. Rain Carter called me a few times, talking as if we were confidants. Sienna isn't as gentle and kind as I thought, she complained once. I used to think she was so sweet, but her heart is pitch black. She even said, Madison, if only you were the one who married my cousin, that would have been so much better. I laughed and brushed it off. Don't talk nonsense. Ethan and I are like siblings. Rain scoffed on the other end of the line. Not real siblings. Aunt Carter just took care of you for a few years. You're not even on the family registry. Madison, why don't you crash the wedding? It's happening early next month. Her words made my eye twitch. A vague memory surfaced. Back before Ethan and I got married in my previous life, Rain hadn't treated me with such malice. It was only after the wedding that her attitude took a sharp turn, and she grew closer to Sienna. Now that Sienna was the one marrying Ethan, I couldn't help but wonder if something else was going on. Rain, I asked cautiously. You don't have feelings for Ethan, do you? There was a brief silence on the other end before Rain quickly denied it. What? How could I like him? He's my cousin. After a long pause, she added in a quieter voice. Okay, maybe a little, but he's my blood relative. There's no way it could ever happen. That's why I just want to find him a good wife. Madison, she continued, are you sure you're not reconsidering him? I chuckled lightly, brushing her off with vague pleasantries while saving the recording of our conversation. I'll definitely go, I replied. Rain Carter let out an excited cheer. A month later, I showed up at the wedding. When I arrived at the venue, Ethan was being wheeled out by Sienna to greet the guests. Ethan, clearly embarrassed, gritted his teeth. Did you really have to drag me out here? Sienna smacked the back of his head. Say one more word, and I'll tear your mouth apart. I hadn't expected their relationship to deteriorate so badly. That they were even getting married was thanks to Aunt Carter's deliberate efforts to make Sienna suffer. When Ethan was healthy, Aunt Carter would never have allowed someone from Sienna's family background to get close to her son. But now that Ethan was disabled, families of equal status naturally didn't want to marry their daughters to him. Aunt Carter's original plan had been for me to marry Ethan. However, a few months ago, Ethan had stubbornly insisted on being with Sienna, leaving Aunt Carter too humiliated to ask me to step in. Instead, she offered Sienna's family $30,000 as a one-time payment to buy her for Ethan. Sienna's family happily handed over her household registration once they received the money. First, Sienna went along with caring for Ethan for the sake of the money, but after being tricked into marriage, she realized she had been cut off, with Aunt Carter refusing to give her a single cent more. Divorce wasn't an option either. If it's such a great, earth-shattering love, then let's lock it in for life, Aunt Carter had said. From a distance, Ethan noticed me. His gaze lingered on my legs, a look of longing flashing across his face. Aunt Carter had yet to show up at the wedding, clearly intending to embarrass Sienna openly. But what puzzled me was that it seemed like even the Carter family had given up on Ethan entirely. Sitting at the relatives' table, Rain noticed me and stealthily flashed me an okay sign. This was part of her plan. During the wedding reception, Rain had arranged for a slideshow showcasing moments from my history, with Ethan to play for everyone. Her plan was to provoke Ethan's feelings for me, making him regret his decisions and even cancel the wedding on the spot. It would ruin the wedding and humiliate Sienna to the greatest extent possible. Of course, Rain conveniently left out the part where this plan would also leave me in an extremely awkward position. I could hear her calculations loud and clear, so I subtly made a few adjustments of my own. Well, isn't this Ethan's little sidekick? A familiar voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see one of Ethan's old friends, the same one who used to make things difficult for me. TSK. Look at you. Still pining after a cripple? Don't tell me you have some special preference, he said mockingly, showing no respect for me. Or Ethan. If you're not here to eat, then get lost. Ethan's voice boomed out of nowhere. I hadn't realized he'd wheeled himself over to stand by my side. He glared at his former friend, fury in his eyes. Do you really think you're someone important? The man sneered, looking Ethan up and down with disdain. Pity for a cripple is all you're getting. Let me tell you something. Your dad has already brought your 12-year-old half-brother home. A bastard child? I was genuinely surprised. It seemed like even Ethan's father had abandoned him. Get out. Zhou. Ethan roared, his voice trembling with rage. He was already on the verge of losing control, though his condition made it impossible for him to physically retaliate. Zhou ignored him entirely and sat back down with a smug grin. What now? Ethan? What kind of scene are you making this time? Sienna's voice cut through the tension as she stormed over. Without missing a beat, she kicked Ethan's paralyzed legs. Are you trying to embarrass me even more today? She followed this with another barrage of slaps and scolding, completely disregarding the crowd. Let it go. Sienna, Zhou said, laughing. At least give him some face in public. After all, his old flame is right here. As he spoke, his gaze shifted toward me. I hadn't planned on stirring up trouble at the wedding, but Zhou, in both my past life and this one, was just too vile. I grabbed a glass of red wine from the table and threw it straight at him. As he stood there, stunned, I warned him coldly. Insult Ethan all you want. That's your business. But watch your mouth when it comes to me. Otherwise, I won't hesitate to reveal all those dirty deals you've been hiding from the Carter family. Like how you introduced girls to that perverted Mr. Lin. In my past life, Zhou had a habit of introducing women to older men with disturbing preferences. That same Mr. Lin was the one he had arranged for Ethan to meet. Hearing me mention Mr. Lin, Zhou immediately went pale and shrank back like a frightened quail. Madison, Ethan choked out, his voice trembling. I'm sorry. I really didn't know how terrible life as a cripple would be. Before he could finish his apology, the big screen in the room suddenly interrupted him. Rain Carter stood up, clearly excited. Madison, why don't you just crash the wedding? Next month. Rain. I interrupted her sharply. Don't tell me you. Of course not. I couldn't possibly like my cousin. Rain stammered, her voice high-pitched and defensive. After a moment, she added, okay, maybe just a little. But he's my blood relative, so it's impossible. That's why I just want to find him a good wife. Rain's and my voices were broadcasted loud and clear across the venue through the speakers. The wedding, which was already chaotic, descended into complete pandemonium. Rain screamed at the staff to turn off the screen, but before they could, Sienna rushed at her and began hitting her. Sienna's curses and accusations rang out loudly, and even with several people trying to hold her back, no one could stop her. I couldn't help but marvel at the irony. Sienna had grown up in a rural, male-preferential family. How could she ever have been mistaken for a delicate, innocent flower? Remembering her composed and serene demeanor during our earlier conversation at the restaurant, I found the contrast almost laughable. Taking advantage of the chaos, I quietly left the venue. Behind me, Ethan's voice called out to me repeatedly. What happened afterward? I only learned through others. Rain's inappropriate feelings for Ethan were exposed, leading to a massive family argument between her parents and Ethan's father. They were convinced Ethan had crossed some boundary, prompting Rain's misguided affection. Already disappointed in Ethan, Mr. Carter completely gave up on him. Even Aunt Carter reluctantly abandoned him. It was easier for them to focus on raising Ethan's half-brother, whose mother had passed away years ago. They reasoned it wasn't too late to develop a bond with the boy and groom him as their heir. As for Sienna, her reputation was in tatters. Her public outbursts earned her the nickname the Shrew, and she found herself on the verge of being ostracized. She wanted a divorce, but the Carter family wouldn't let her go. They blamed her for Ethan's downfall, insisting that if she hadn't bewitched him, he and I would have ended up together. In their eyes, with my feelings for Ethan, I would never have hesitated to save him in that accident. They believed that if I had lost my legs instead, Ethan would have married me out of gratitude, a move that would have garnered public sympathy for the family. Their selfish logic left me utterly disgusted. Whatever lingering sympathy I had for the Carter family evaporated completely. 6 months later, Ethan took his own life. He didn't go alone. He took Sienna with him. I heard that Sienna had secretly reconnected with Zhou and tried to introduce Ethan to one of Zhou's shady connections. When Ethan woke up and realized what had happened, he lost his mind entirely. He alternated between crying about his own foolishness and cursing Sienna, declaring she deserved a horrible death. In the end, he hired someone to replace Sienna's usual vitamins with sleeping pills. Once she fell into a deep sleep, he set fire to their home, burning both of them alive. After Ethan's death, I received a letter from him. I didn't bother opening it. I knew it would contain nothing but meaningless regrets. Without hesitation, I tossed it into the trash. There are no second chances for people like him, even if fate allowed him to live again. No matter how many times he tried to change the outcome, I would never waver. I have a clear goal for my life now. I will only strive to become the best version of myself.